Warning, this game has been leaked onto the internet. Due to the short time span of my play session, I couldn't spoil this game for you if I wanted to, but I can't promise anything outside of this video, including the comment section, which will likely not be moderated if they appear due to my channel size and general viewer interaction. You've been warned. Okay, to start off, I am not a major Final Fantasy fan by any stretch. I've beaten the 13 trilogy, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy X, but that's it. I mean, I've tried other games. 6, 7, more recently, World of Final Fantasy, none of which are games I would say are bad, just I haven't really had it in me to finish them. Especially 7, since it's been spoiled to high heaven, and I know a remake is coming out later anyway, so what's the point of continuing? I bring this up so that I can include some context for you on where I stand. I know about Final Fantasy, I've played some Final Fantasy games, but I am not a Final Fantasy fan. That context will be a huge point later on in this video. Now with that said, this game doesn't even seem so much like a Final Fantasy to me, so much as something like Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U. A large open world with unknown wildlife roaming around you, and you can expect to hear that analogy again because so far, this game has many of the same strengths, same shortcomings as Xenoblade Chronicles X. Alright, from this point onward, everything you see on the screen is my recording of the launch version of the game with the crown patch, which, yes, I'm mad exists, considering avoiding a day one patch was the reason the game was delayed in the first place, but whatever, it's fine. It's obviously not ideal, but the game is still playable regardless. The game recording is on a standard PS4, not PS4 Pro, and in advance, sorry if there are any hiccups in the video quality. I had recorded the file raw, but it was so huge that my editor crashed when I tried to load it, so I had to compress it significantly just to be able to edit the file at all. Okay now, first off, don't make the same mistake I did. Skip the tutorial! You don't need it at all. The game holds your hand plenty for the first bit, and gives you trophies left and right to boot, and it takes about half an hour to complete the whole thing for no reward. Though I will say there is a brief lore tutorial, which involves reading some painting descriptions, which you may want to go through. Especially if you didn't get involved in the whole Final Fantasy XV expanded universe. Speaking of which, let's get that elephant out of the way. I had recorded and edited a phase talking about it before the game came out, but now that it has, I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. I said you don't need to go through any of them to understand the plot, but you do. Just trust me on this. You do. The game will try to fill in as many plot holes as possible, but it's still pretty much a requirement to at least watch the anime shorts. Episodes 2 and 3 especially. I won't write off the others yet, but so far into the game I've heard both of them have plot points come up, so you've been warned. As for the others, the movie called Kingsglaive has some of the more important scenes edited into the game with the Day 1 patch, but there's still some subtext you'll only really get from the movie. Although I will say that unlike Brotherhood, I don't see Kingsglaive as a requirement. At least not yet. I'd definitely check them out after playing the game if you need more Final Fantasy XV though. So, you got that if nothing else. Now then, for the main selling point of the game, the exploration. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, it's big. Here, see this? This is a screenshot of my in-game map after the 5-hour recording session ended. Yeah, that's all I managed to run around, and that isn't through a lack of interest, and it's not from just not running around or anything like that. It's just a testament to how big the world is. The vast open world, and while I think it's one of the biggest strengths of the game, it's also kind of a weakness. For one, this game is way too big for its own good. There is a lot of empty space with nothing, and I'd understand that from time to time, but even for a desert region, this is a bit on the ridiculous side. I assume you all know about that infamous car pushing scene from early on in the game. It can be used to symbolize this whole map so far. There's a lot here to run around in, and to explore, and there's monsters that'll show up for you to fight, and Imperial soldiers will come from time to time, but as far as the world itself is concerned, there isn't much here. That isn't to say there's nothing here, far from it. Again, look at the map. But, well, look at the symbols here. They're just markers, and everything between just isn't really there. There's some set pieces to catch your eye once in a while, but once you're driving down the same road for the 50th time, it loses its charm a bit. Oh, you think I'm kidding about the 50th time thing? You're so naive. Just trust me on this for now. You will be using that car a lot. And there is a limited fast travel ability for 10 gil. But it only works for some destinations or missions, so it isn't exactly a saving grace for the regalia. Remember when I brought up Xenoblade Chronicles X? Here's a side-by-side of the desert regions the games have. And granted, in Chronicles X, this is the third world area as opposed to the first, but, well, here's that game's first area, Primordia, which when put up against Dusksky, this game's equivalent. Do you see what I mean here? Even with the hardware advantage, Final Fantasy XV's world just isn't really living up to the task of being the ultimate exploration game. By all intentions though, don't mistake my critiques for malice. As is, the exploration is still a wonderfully welcome addition, especially if you're fresh off the hallway simulator that is Final Fantasy XIII. And I did find myself getting lost, a lot. Even with the map, especially at night, which is an aspect that never once happened in Xenoblade Chronicles X because the second screen was always acting as a map. In addition to the exploration though, you have the day-night cycle I just mentioned a second ago. And when night rolls around, you are heavily advised by the game to either find a hotel room, which is expensive, use a camper trailer that's lying around, which is about 30 gil, not too bad, but still you shouldn't rely too heavily on it, or you can find a campsite yourself. Now, using the hotels and trailers can boost your EXP you gain that day, which is great. Now, using the hotels and trailers can boost your EXP you gain for that day, which is great. But it comes at the expense of not having Ignis cook, so you won't be able to choose a temporary bonus for the next day. Each character has a skill that is unique to them. Ignis has the previously mentioned cooking skill, where he uses ingredients either found or bought to cook up a new dish that will allow for a temporary HP increase, MP increase, EXP collection, or added resistances. That sort of thing. Gladius has a survival skill to help the others get up on their feet during or after combat, which levels up by walking. This is probably the most useful skill. Oh, you should probably walk around. A lot. At least at the start of the game. Frontis has photography, which levels up daily regardless, but he will request photo ops from time to time to further level him up. You'll be able to see said photos when you are at camp, and they're all unique to your playthrough, which makes it an interesting bit to hunt down. Lastly is Noctis, who has fishing. Not that. Anything but that. But yeah. Noctis is a fisherman, and it's about as fleshed out as it was there as well. You pick a lure, you pick a pole, you pick a line and all that, but the only part that really matters is the lure, since that will change the kind of fish you can catch. You toss the line out, and you wiggle it around a little bit until a fish bites. You have a brief QTE-like segment where you catch the fish, and then you repeat the process until you are satisfied. Oh, but don't let the line go below 50% of its total HP, or the others will start complaining constantly about how the line will break. You want to change your line? More complaints. You want to try a different lure? Complaints! Want to cast? Complaints. Want to idle? You know what comes next. It's even better on small, murky bodies of water when you can't even see the fish under the water, so you have no clue about what's lurking down there. If anything, other than the little mini-map, but that doesn't really count because it won't necessarily tell you what you need to fish for. Yes! I am going into grotesque detail over this feature. I never want to look at this again, so I'm saying everything now. Burn the fishing minigame. Burn with fire. And burn that fire with fire! And lastly, burn Big the Cow with fire.
Where are you?
To transition from something I despise to something I adore in this game, let's look at the side quests. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and it's very possible not to even notice some of them exist. Admittedly, a lot of them are just busy work, but that's kind of the point of playing a lot of these RPG type games. Busy work is exactly the sort of thing you need in order to hold your attention at all. And these missions are very much plentiful, and they pay out a lot to boot. And if that bores you, talking to a restaurant keeper will let you accept bounty hunts, where, again, a lot of these are busy work, but there are definitely some exceptions. Like, we all remember Deadeye from episode Dusky, right? He's one of them. This game can absolutely keep you busy if you want to stop and smell the roses. I wish I didn't have to mention this, but even as the game that was developed for 10 years, this game is a glitch magnet. And I know it's common for open world games like this, but even then, there's a lot of glitches here. For example, around the 4-hour mark of my playthrough, I was driving at night, and I was forced out of my car, and when I returned the next day, the car was upside down. And when I tried to drive it, I get ambushed by Imperial soldiers, and this happens.
This'll be quick.
Most of the glitches aren't quite this bad, but this is just an example of what can happen. Be wary. I'll wrap this up by talking about the car the guys use, the Regalia, which is something I mentioned before in Dread, but really, it's not as bad as I made it out to be. The game will have you drive around the car, around the roads, in order to get at your destination relatively quickly. Well, don't get me wrong, chocobos look great too. I'd advise staying with the car when you can. For one, the radio. From the get-go, you get tracks from the expanded Final Fantasy XV universe, as well as the original Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy XIII. And the other games have soundtracks that can be bought for 100 gil at the shops. different shops have different tracks. Like, I know the shop at the beach has Final Fantasy V, and just to clarify, no, it isn't the whole soundtrack. It's just around 10 songs. They handpicked some from the games, which, considering you have to change the songs with the D-pad, any more could have proven to be a disaster, so I'm glad they kept it somewhat small. The cars are also the fastest form of travel, even without the fast travel added into the mix. Although I warn you from my past experience. You see that gauge there at the lower left side of the screen? Unless you want an extended version of that opening cinematic where you push the car to a gas station, do not let it hit empty. Gas costs about 10 gil regardless, so it can go a bit low if you want it to, but don't let it go under half a tank unless your destination is nearby. As for driving itself, you can either have Ignis drive, automatic mode, or Noctis can drive. Most of the time you're encouraged to let Ignis drive since he won't miss the turns, but he also won't make some of the turns for the less traveled roads that Noctis might be able to. Noctis is required to be the driver at night since Ignis refuses to drive then, but theoretically you should be bunked by then at the camp, so just don't drive at night too much because monster ambushes are common. And with that, there's the highlights of what I saw in my 5-hour playthrough. By all means, there's more to this, but this is the important stuff. As for my final impression, yes, I do think it's a good game. Great even! But knowing Square Enix, a price drop will be coming before you know it. So if you didn't buy it at launch, I'd wait a little for either a price drop or for the rumored Nintendo Switch or PC versions of the game to be released. Well, that's all for now. Thank you all for watching it, and I'll see you around next time for more 5-hour impressions. If you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go back to playing more Final Fantasy 15.